Hello and welcome to the third review of Request Month 2022, although in this particular case it's not quite a review, which you'll understand more in a moment. This is the Talos principle for PC, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. What you're seeing here is the PC version, which was sent to me by a viewer who prefers to remain anonymous. Thank you for that, the support is greatly appreciated. This is a puzzle game developed by Crow Team and published by Devolver Digital in 2014 for PC, Mac, and Linux, and in the ensuing years it was re-released across a variety of other systems as well. Upon its original release, the game was generally very well received, and if you look on Steam, the reviews are apparently overwhelmingly positive. And owing to that fact, I'm going to be completely upfront with you on this. There is a reason this is not quite a review rather than a standard review. And it's because of something that I don't feel has been communicated properly to my audience because I almost never cover puzzle games on the channel. The simple fact of the matter is that I never cover puzzle games because I don't play them. And I don't play puzzle games because I absolutely despise them. And that will likely come as a surprise to you, and some of you might be saying that I'm an absolute hypocrite because I enjoy the living crap out of adventure games but not puzzle games, and they both have tons of puzzles in them. The big difference there is what purpose those puzzles are serving. In an adventure game or an action-adventure game, they are challenges for you to complete so you can move on to the next part of the game. And if they're done well, they're woven into the narrative in some regard. In a puzzle game, on the other hand, the entire point of them is just the puzzles. You're solving puzzles purely for solving puzzles' sake. You solve one puzzle so you can move on to the next puzzle. And that's it. There's not really anything else going on there. And that's all well and good if you like simply solving puzzles for solving puzzles' sake. I'm not one of those people. I've always found that solving puzzles for puzzles' sake makes me feel like I am wasting my time. And when I feel like I'm wasting my time, I get pretty irritated. And the more I feel like I'm wasting my time, the more irritated I get. So in general, I try to avoid puzzle games as much as I possibly can. But then that viewer sent me a copy of this to review. So at that point, I became obligated to play the Talos principle and at least do a video on it. And the more I went through it, the more irritated I was getting, and the more I hated the experience, until eventually I decided, you know what? This isn't going to be a standard review, but it's also going to serve as a warning to anybody who would try to request a puzzle game. Don't request puzzle games. Don't send me puzzle games to review, because from this point on, I will not play any more of them. I might eventually do a redux on Portal and Portal 2 since I did those videos a long time ago, but other than that, if it's a puzzle game, I'm just going to avoid it entirely. Now then, as for this review of the Talos principle, what's going on with that? Well, when I get to the end, I'm not going to give it a score summary like I normally do. I will give it a general recommendation for or against if you happen to like puzzle games. And if you don't like puzzle games, then just stop watching the video because I'm going to tell every single one of you to avoid the Talos principle entirely. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and start delving right into this thing and see what we're dealing with here, and whether or not it is something I can recommend to puzzle game fans. And like always, we'll go ahead and start with the presentation, which runs on the Sirius engine. More specifically, a slightly more advanced version of the engine that powered Sirius Sam 3 BFE. And at the time the game released, it looked pretty good actually. It had some pretty nice texture quality and modeling, and the environments in particular looked quite nice. It also helps that it's certainly more colorful than Sirius Sam 3 BFE was, so even several years removed from the game's release, it still actually looks quite good, and on top of that, it runs extremely well. I don't think this thing ever went below about 120 frames per second. Really, the only part of the visuals that isn't all that great are the character animations, which you really don't see all that much anyway, so it's not that big of a deal, but they are still on the weaker side, so it is worth mentioning. Then you move over into sound design and you end up with a soundtrack that is very well done, featuring a lot of choral arrangements and a lot of sounds inspired by ancient cultures. And it all sounds quite good, although it does tend to blend together a bit, so it's kind of hard to tell individual tracks apart. The sound effects themselves get the job done, but there's nothing particularly impressive about them. And then when you move over into the voice acting, there's really not a whole lot going on there. Most of what you're going to be hearing is the voice of Elohim, who talks to you in a booming voice that's meant to imitate the sound of a deity talking to you, and it actually gets really annoying after a while. But apart from that, the rest of the voice acting just suffices. It's mostly in audio logs, and it's mostly one particular character, so you don't really get a whole lot of variety there. But it's all voiced decently. There's nothing particularly good about it, but there's nothing particularly bad about it either. So, unfortunately, with regards to the voice acting, there's just not a whole lot to talk about there. But when you bring all of the presentation together, you end up with something that actually works quite well for the most part. It does have a few issues here and there, but they're pretty easy to overlook. But of course, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay. And the story in this is that you play as a robot who is sent to complete a series of trials by Elohim, this booming voice that talks to you in a deific manner, acting like it is the creator of the universe, and thus you must obey its commandments and such. And you are tasked with completing a long series of trials, which consists of solving a crap ton of puzzles in order to earn sigils, which are basically just Tetris blocks. And once you've earned enough sigils, then you can open a series of locks. Some of them will allow you to gain access to new methods of solving puzzles, but other ones will allow you to access new areas, and as you continue to progress through the game, you'll gradually uncover more about what this world actually is, who or what Elohim is, and who or what you are, as well as what your purpose is in all of this mess. You'll find audio logs that will detail things that a researcher experienced while working on whatever this project is. You'll learn a bit more about what the Talos principle is. And while you'll have pieced together what happened long before you ever get to the end of the game, when you do get to the end, it tries to wrap everything up and explain everything to you, and it's just not really all that interesting. The problem is that while the game does try to include some high-level concepts, things like what is the nature of consciousness, can artificial intelligence actually be conscious, so on and so forth, that all just ends up being set dressing, because almost the entirety of the game you're going to be focused almost exclusively on solving the puzzles, because that's all you can do in this thing. You can move, you can solve puzzles, and you can interact with terminals. And when you do interact with the terminals, most of what you're going to be doing there is just reading documents. And all of this is told to you in such a dry and boring manner that it's basically impossible to actually care about it. Especially when a lot of it is wrapped up in biblical references among other religious references, and that can get really condescending after a while. Now sure, to some degree that's the point. It's trying to be a bit obnoxious in some ways to try to steer you in certain directions, but that doesn't make it any less irritating. It has a similar problem to a lot of games from that time period, that early 2010s to mid-2010s period, where games were starting to be seen more as an art form, and were trying to incorporate elements to make their games seem a lot more intelligent and thoughtful than they actually are. I mean, the philosophy in this game is really not much more than what you would get out of an entry-level philosophy course. But the game certainly acts like it's incredibly profound, and that was enough to send all of the gaming press into a frenzy of endless praise for a game back when this originally released. Although given that they were constantly acting like The Last of Us 2 is this incredibly profound rumination on the nature of revenge, I'd say that mentality really hasn't changed much since then. At any rate, when you take a look at the story and what little exists as far as character as a whole, you end up with something that is just so in the background and so passive with how you actually experience it that you're really just going to end up focusing on the gameplay anyway, and that's where this game might succeed if you're a puzzle fan, but if you're not a puzzle fan, which I'm not, then it's going to be absolute misery. Because this game consists of well over 100 puzzles. They advertise over 120, but it's closer to 140 in the base game, with another 20-something in the Road to Gehenna DLC. So if you are into puzzles, then you're getting an awful lot of them here, but what do those puzzles actually entail? Well, there are not a whole lot of ways you can specifically interact with the world. You have your movement controls, which are, of course, forward, backward, left, and right, as well as a jump key, which doesn't really do a whole lot until you gain access to hexahedrons later on, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. And apart from moving around, you can pick up things and place them somewhere in the environment. And that's basically what you're going to be doing the entire game. The list of tools you have is actually relatively small. You have a basic jammer, which allows you to place it somewhere in the environment to either disable a force field, or to stop a dangerous thing in its tracks, or to disable a sentry gun or something along those lines. You have a prism connector, which you can place to route beams of light. You have hexahedrons, which are basically just big blocks that you can pick up and then place somewhere to either jump to something else, or to block something from moving, or to simply weigh something down. You have fans, which will allow you to either make things float or to send them flying along a certain path, and those fans can also be picked up and placed on other receptacles to allow them to function in different areas. And then there's the cloner rewind feature, which allows you to program a set of actions, and then once you activate it, then it will spawn a digital copy of yourself that will move around and complete those actions that you just did. And a lot of the time that's going to be used to complete 2 tasks at the same time. The puzzles themselves are all to earn sigils, which, as I said before, are basically Tetris blocks, and those come in 3 varieties: green, yellow, and red. As you might expect, these correspond to the general difficulty and complexity of the puzzles you're going to be solving. So the green ones are the quick and easy puzzles, the yellow ones are the more intermediate puzzles, and the red ones are supposed to be the more difficult and complicated puzzles. Although certainly early on in the game, those red puzzles are going to be pretty limited with what you can actually do with them. It's only once you get pretty late into the game where you start getting the red puzzles that are really complicated and have a whole bunch of things going on. Which of course makes sense, because by that point you've unlocked all the different tools. And while the game does tell you that you can complete these puzzles in any order that you wish, that's only true to some degree. You have to have certain tools to be able to complete certain puzzles, and while you can certainly go into those areas and you can go into that puzzle, you'll get a notification when you enter a puzzle area that tells you what tools are going to be used throughout the puzzle, and if you don't have a certain tool, then that particular tool icon will flash when you enter the area, which is your indicator that you don't have that tool and thus cannot complete that puzzle yet. So despite the game saying that you can complete those puzzles in any order that you want, you really can't. You have to prioritize getting all of the tools first, and then after that you can start focusing on getting the sigils you need to access new worlds and such like that. And to that end, the game is split into 4 main sections. The first one you start in is the Land of Ruins. You go in there, you complete a bunch of puzzles, and you get enough sigils to unlock the door that will lead to the other areas. Once you get to this new hub, you gain access to 2 additional areas, the Land of Death and the Land of Faith. And you're really supposed to complete the Land of Death before you move on to the Land of Faith. So the real order in which you complete the game is Land of Ruins, Land of Death, and then Land of Faith. And by the time you have completed all of the puzzles in all 3 of the worlds, you're going to have all of the red sigils, and you might be wondering what those are for. Because you've used the green sigils to unlock the doors leading to the lands of faith and death, and you've used the yellow sigils to unlock all of the tools, but what are the red sigils for? Well, those are for the tower, which Elohim specifically tells you you are forbidden from ascending. But unlike where the green sigils will unlock entire worlds for you to go around and complete a whole bunch of puzzles in, the red sigils unlock new floors of the tower in a very linear fashion. I should also note that the sigils also play a role in puzzle solving, because whenever you go to unlock a door or unlock a new tool or something like that, you end up having to slot the various sigils in such a way to where they all fill in this grid, and it just ends up being a basic tiling puzzle. And honestly, I'd think everybody can agree on this, whether you're a puzzle game fan or not, but tiling puzzles are absolute trash. And since this game has quite a lot of sigils for you to get, there's going to be a fair few tiling puzzles that you're going to have to do. And not only do those get quite tedious, but they get a bit irritating as well, because you're in the process of trying to get to some of the more, at least kind of interesting puzzles, and the thing between you and them is this obnoxious tile puzzle where you just had to trial and error the crap out of it. Anyway, aside from all of that, there are also stars that you'll occasionally find as you're wandering around and completing puzzles, and collecting all of these stars will require you to complete some more elaborate puzzles. As you continue to collect stars, you will gradually gain access to new puzzle areas, and those will play a role in accessing an additional ending for the game. That's right, the game actually has multiple endings, which is certainly a bit odd for a puzzle game, but it's welcome if you happen to like the game enough to go for more completionist runs or something. But of course, the real question with all of this is, how does this all actually play out? Is this something I can ultimately recommend to puzzle fans? Because I certainly wasn't having any fun with this game on a personal level the entire time I was playing it. Again, I absolutely despise playing puzzle games. I feel like they are just wasting my time. This one was no exception there. But as for the actual puzzle designs themselves, the operating word I had for a lot of them was tedious. There are numerous puzzles which require you to just stand around waiting for a bit while things move around. There are numerous puzzles that require you to backtrack and readjust a whole bunch of stuff over and over again. And there are a fair few puzzles that are so simple and so easy that you'll get through them in the matter of seconds and wonder why you even bothered with them in the first place. It's only once you gain access to all of the tools available to you that you'll start to notice some more clever puzzle designs, and even then, a lot of those can devolve into tedium as well. And the further you go into the game, the more you'll notice certain puzzles feel like they're just absolute filler content, like they were just thrown together to have a puzzle there so you could get another sigil, not expand upon the concepts that you've already been introduced to, or expand upon the possibilities that you have for all of the tools available to you. This is where a bit more structured linearity actually comes into play. When you have open-ended design like this, it's more difficult to structure things in such a way to where the mechanics really build upon themselves and really expand the possibilities of what you're capable of doing with them. If you do things in a more linear fashion, like, say, what Portal and Portal 2 do, then you can have mechanics that gradually expand upon themselves and give you new possibilities while also introducing new mechanics as you progress. That's not to say it can't be done with more open-ended design, but it's just more difficult to pull it off, and the Talos principle doesn't really stick the landing in that regard. Does that mean it's a bad puzzle game, though? Well, no, not really. I'd say that if you are a fan of puzzle games, you will probably be able to get something out of this. But this very much is an instance where only puzzle game fans really need apply here. If you're more ambivalent towards puzzle games, there's really not a whole lot to latch onto here, and if you're not a fan of puzzle games, this is definitely not going to win you over at all. And even if you are a puzzle game fan and something like this is up your alley, your mileage is definitely going to vary thanks to the writing. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in later videos.